Nintendo is known for transforming the gaming landscape with their crazy ideas, since they've done so many times. Just think of the days when they released games like Super Mario 64, which changed the way people looked at 3D platformers. Or Ocarina of Time, which had a huge impact on almost all adventure and RPG games. It's clear that this huge Japanese company can raise standards all on their own, and they recently did this as well with the games on the Switch. I'm talking about Super Mario Odyssey, of course. A platforming game that will leave a lasting impact on the entire genre, whether you like it or not. However, how did they make this game? What inspired them? And what ended up in the game? And what was scrapped? Well, let's find out how the game evolved from absolutely nothing to one of the best-selling titles in history. Now, all of this started really long ago, in a time where Nintendo was in a tough spot thanks to their new console called the Wii U not selling that well. They did make a 3D game for it, Super Mario 3D World, which wasn't a bad game and performed quite well. However, right after they finished this game, Nintendo already moved on. Development for Super Mario Odyssey began right after the previous one was released. For this game, Miyamoto sought more senior developers and staff teams who had been involved in past 3D Mario titles. And this was only for one reason. They wanted to go back to their roots. You know, titles like Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario 64? Now, the reason why they wanted to do this is because they were planning to make a more traditional main series Mario game. A title that's different from both Super Mario 3D World and Land, which were the previous ones. And they even explained all of this to us during E3. Shigeru Miyamoto was asked about his statement of coming home to Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine style of gameplay. He explained that when he was developing Super Mario 64 with, I'm gonna say this wrong, Yoshiaki Koizumi, they realized that the title would be more directed towards the core gamer. You know, those hardcore epic gamers. Mostly because it wasn't that easy and you had to be quite dedicated in order to fully complete the game, with some really challenging sections for sure. It just wasn't made for the casual pick up and go gamer. Someone like that couldn't even perform half the moves that you had in the game. And the title after that, Super Mario Sunshine, also fell into this category with all the flood and free running moves you had. However, after these titles, things changed. Their focus reshifted to something more accessible, for casual gamers basically, which was most likely thanks to the more family and kid-friendly approach with the Nintendo Wii. And so they started to make games like Super Mario Galaxy, with more progression-oriented gameplay corridors, linear levels, and less complex movement options. Now, don't get me wrong, I still love these games, however it's not as hard as Super Mario 64, and certainly way more restricted than such a title. And in recent years, they made games like Super Mario 3D World, and even though that's also a 3D game, it's a little bit more accessible to everybody. They were stuck in that trend for quite a long time. So when they thought about making a Mario game for the Switch, they wanted to make it more like one of those older core games. And so the other breed of Mario titles was finally back. But what happened then? Sure, they knew what they wanted to make, but how did they come up with all the new mechanics? Especially since they didn't 100% know what would happen to the Wii U in the end. Well, Nintendo actually figured out what was happening to the Wii U quite quickly. And so the new Mario game was developed alongside the Switch hardware. So the crazy year of amazing Switch games in 2017 was completely planned out. It wasn't just the new Zelda game that was made for the Switch in the end, but even the new Mario title that appeared later on in the year. Yoshiaki Koizumi even encouraged the game's developers to share their requirements and suggestions with the hardware development team for the Nintendo Switch. So, did they have an impact on the console then? Well, yes. Thanks to them, it got a lot of new features. For example, the 2 motion-sensitive controllers and the HD Rumble feature, both of which became a prominent part of the Super Mario Odyssey gameplay. Although no one really uses it, except for a couple of people. We all know Nintendo. They had to add some sort of weird gimmick to the game, or it wouldn't really suit them. But it also worked the other way around. They kept in mind how the Switch worked with its home console and handheld capabilities. For example, creating small tasks and things you can do, as well as huge challenges. In the end, Yoshiaki Koizumi and Kenta Motokura became the big leaders of this game, while Miyamoto watched on the sideline having a consultative role. And so they started working on the game seriously, doing something quite strange in the early stages of development to really figure out what they wanted in this title. Now, one of the things they knew from the start is that they wanted a travel theme, with Mario going to different places around the world. And they also started creating a huge amount of gameplay prototypes with numerous ideas implemented in them, with the well-known capture ability being among them. It was just one of the ideas they came up with, and when they worked on it for 2 or 3 days, it just instantly turned into something that was really fun. And so they decided that this mechanic should be the center of the game. And sadly enough, I couldn't find any of the other ideas they were working on. But I do know that a lot of the other prototype ideas were still included, which explains why it's so diverse in terms of game mechanics, all crammed into those kingdoms. Huge worlds which were inspired by the Japanese Hakanoa box gardens, which bring rich landscapes to life in a miniaturized version. In a way, it's a bit similar to what happened in Breath of the Wild, where Japanese puzzle boxes inspired them a lot for the dungeons. Now, the size of the world was often adjusted to ensure that you can regularly discover an engaging action to perform. Yet again, most likely because of the handheld and home console options, as well as a way to keep people engaged. So it's quite clear what inspired them when it comes to gameplay mechanics and general design. However, there are some other smaller things I haven't really touched on. For example, where did those coins come from? How did the game get so refined? And what inspired them to make the 2D sections? Well, let's get into that, since these were mostly design choices, and a lot of them stemmed from one place: the travel theme. Surprises and travel was really important, with developers even injecting their vacation experiences. It needed to be fun and new, like a real vacation. And they recognized that when traveling, something that played a huge role is the different currencies. And so they introduced the idea of collecting and using these different coins in each area, which also introduced some more interesting things to find in the levels. So while things like that, as well as a lot of the kingdoms, were inspired by countries around the world like Italy and Mexico, they also looked at older games for inspiration. For example, Super Mario World. This game inspired a lot of elements seen in the Lost Kingdom as well as the Cascade Kingdom. Now, while this old game did inspire them, they wanted to make something new and special for this game. That's why we see all kinds of crazy stuff like the T-Rex. Something like that is completely different from anything that was even possible in Super Mario World. But they also wanted to include familiar gameplay elements, like the 8-bit side-scrolling areas, which the original Super Mario Bros. Inspired, of course. And these parts are clearly more linear and straightforward with only one answer. And this was intended to be an interesting contrast to the 3D sandbox stuff. However, this isn't where it ends. Oh no, because they also came up with ideas which were a combination of the two things we just talked about: older games and travel. They wanted to make a city based on New York, but they also added Donkey Kong inspired elements, like Pauline, who they turned into the mayor of New Donk City, and they needed to make her more interesting, and so they gave her an interest in jazz. Because, her character was quite underdeveloped to say the least. And all of this led to the composition of the game's theme song, Jump Up Superstar, which was there to get people excited. However, there were also a number of designs, ideas, and costume types that didn't make it into the game. Actually, a whole lot of them. For example, Cloud Mario, Toadette, a sailor uniform, a Luma, the Green Sprixie Princess, and way more. All of which can be seen in the Art of Super Mario Odyssey book, which is filled with development information. So much, in fact, that we can't even cover it all. So we will be touching on some of the most interesting things, like the early designs of the races seen in the different kingdoms, like the Lock Ladies, Shiverans, Bubblians, Bonneters, Rabbits, Volbonans, Toasterinians, and Steam Gardeners. And yes, I pronounced a ton of those wrong, but it's all Nintendo's fault, because they should come up with names that are easier to pronounce. All of these went through design changes, but remained the same for the most part. In my opinion, these are the most interesting to look at, but believe me, there are many more. But now we've at least seen a part of them. However, there were also a number of gameplay and story elements that they wanted to add, but never did in the end, like returning characters and completely new villains. One of the most interesting ones is that Rosalina was originally going to have a role in the game. She was going to be a street musician who specialized in playing the acoustic guitar, which they could have implemented quite easily, but in the end it didn't happen. Another good one is that Bowser was originally going to be assisted by an evil Bonneter serving as a villainous version of Cappy, allowing him to capture other characters and objects just like Mario. In the original concept art for the game's final boss battle, we even see him capture Peach, with her design being altered to resemble Bowser's. But all of this was replaced with a robotic top hat equipped with mechanical boxing gloves. These two things were by far the most interesting that were scrapped during development, and we don't even know why. And so in the end, by taking ideas from other countries, cultures, the development team, and even older games in the series both 2D and 3D, the game took shape. Even the camera system was vastly improved thanks to the team looking into the old 3D Mario games, learning from them, and then perfecting it all. And in the end, when the game came out, it was an instant hit, selling over 12 million copies in its first year, 2 million of which were in the first 3 days. Currently it's somewhere around the 17 million mark, being one of the most successful games on the Nintendo Switch. So it was a huge success. Now later on, only some small bits of DLC came out, with stuff like new outfits and Balloon World which featured Luigi. However, these parts weren't huge. Only the new minigame really played an interesting role, really making use of the platforming skills Mario has with Cappy. That was most likely what inspired them. They saw players doing amazing things in the game, and so they decided to combine it with hide and seek, and that's sadly enough where the Super Mario Odyssey journey ends. They never made any big DLC after all. But maybe we will see a sequel. Who knows?